Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Contested Rural Environment series. My name is Professor Sarah Skerritt, and I'm the Chief Exec here at the RSE, and I'm very excited to be chairing the session today, particularly given the calibre of the speakers and indeed you, the audience. And I'm also very interested today because I have a background in rural issues, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. As Scotland's National Academy, the RSE's mission is to make knowledge useful. And this series, which is running over 5 weeks, will be addressing 5 key issues that impact rural communities and environments in Scotland. Each week, we'll be speaking to 2 experts who will be discussing the issues and potential solutions around land use change and restoring nature, energy futures, tourism, housing and population retention, health and social care, and heritage and regional identity. This series builds on the recent Islands Past, Present and Future events, which highlighted some of the themes we're taking forward through discussion. These events will be available to watch live on the RSE's YouTube channel every Thursday from 12 till 1 until Thursday the 3rd of April, with the recordings available to watch after the event. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers and our summariser. I'm going to read their mini biogs to start with and then hand over to them. So firstly, Professor Donna Heddle, Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, is Head of Research, Environment and Culture and Director of the Institute for Northern Studies at the University of the Highlands and Islands, or UHI. Donna's research interests include Scottish, Northern and Arctic language and literature and cultural tourism. She has won awards for course development and design. She was awarded a personal chair by UHI in June 2013 and served as UHI's acting Vice Principal Research and Impact in 2021 to 22. She's currently a trustee of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland and of Sir Sean Connery's Scottish International Education Trust, and a member of the RSE's Northwest Advisory Board. So welcome, Donna.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were introducing me.
No. We'll hear from you in just a moment. My apologies. My second welcome is to Professor Sandro Carnicelli, Professor of Tourism and Leisure Studies, University of the West of Scotland, and the Deputy Director of the Centre for Culture, Sport and Events, CCSE. Sandro is an alumnus of the Royal Society of Edinburgh Young Academy of Scotland and a member of Abratur, International Academy for the Development of Tourism Research in Brazil. He currently serves on the editorial board of Leisure Studies Journal and Journal of Adventure Education and Outdoor Learning. He also acts as associate editor for Event Management Journal and is currently the editor-in-chief of the World Leisure Journal. Welcome, Sandro. Our summariser, who you'll hear from just before 1 o'clock, is Professor Frank Rennie, Professor Emeritus of Sustainable Rural Development and Research Fellow at the UHI Environment Research Institute. Frank Rennie was Professor of Sustainable Rural Development at the University of the Highlands and Islands and Head of Research at Lewes Castle College, UHI. A natural scientist, he tutored on the MSc in Sustainable Rural Development and the MSc Digital Pedagogy, as well as supervising research students. His main research interests continue to be in human ecology, online education, and the benefits of digital networking for rural development. He's been an advisor to several government bodies, is a fellow of 6 learned societies, and has published around 40 books so far, this says, so we look forward to more. Welcome, Frank. At this point, I'm now going to ask our 2 speakers to give a 5-minute maximum talk to us to set out their stall, giving their perspective on today's key issues. And I'll be keeping an eye on the clock, just so you know. So firstly, over to you, Professor Donna Heddle. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very happy to be here today, as you can tell by my earlier attempt to hijack the proceedings. So it's lovely to be able to come and speak to you about these issues. And first of all, I'd like to say Happy World Happiness Day to everybody. Yet again, for the 8th year in a row, Finland has been judged the happiest country in the world due to their robust economy, their social equality, and their strong sense of community. So well done, Finland. There's also a World Happiness Report that was published today, if anybody's interested in looking at some of the factors that each country has considered to be something that leads to this state of great happiness. But today we're talking about Scotland, and this is an ancient country. It's got some of the oldest rocks in the world. It's got the oldest standing structure in the Western Hemisphere in Papa Westry, here in Orkney, which is where I'm speaking to you from. That's Kirkwall behind me there. The issues we face are not new. There have always been fundamental, perennial influencing factors determining our way of life. First of all, and most obviously, our geography, which is something we can do very little about. Also underemployment, housing challenges, which we'll be talking a bit more about today. There have always been housing challenges. There have always been issues with population health and how to resolve them. There has always been child poverty, and there's also always been issues with transport. Of course, in the Highlands and Islands, we didn't get roads really to speak of until the 18th century in the most northerly part. In the modern era, we can look at other factors that come into this, the high cost of living, fuel poverty, depopulation, aging population, and the fallout from Brexit and COVID-19, and of course, climate change, which very much affects us all. How can we take forward a 21st century solution to these problems, which do not always have the causes that we think they do in point of fact? If we look, for example, at depopulation and population growth as an example, traditionally it appeared that it was the loss of young people that was the problem. And a new report published on the 12th of March, the Scottish Government's Rural Scotland Trajectories of Young People and Young Adults, indicates that actually it's not the issue of young people leaving. As Michael Anderson, FRSE, notes in this report, that there are differences between different parts of the rural mainland and of island groups. So one situation does not fit all, and it's not necessarily the loss of young people that's the issue. There are big differences in population decline, and I should point out at this point that Orkney is the only area in the Highlands and Islands that is not experiencing population decline. So it's much less due to the many young people leaving, but more likely due to the ability of different areas to attract in older adults, those with families in particular. One of the key areas which may help to resolve issues is tourism. That's been going on for a very long time in Scotland. From the Napoleonic Wars in particular, we saw private travellers, and one Thomas Cook, of course, sent his first charabanc north to Scotland in the 19th century. But in the post-COVID time and arena, if you like, there are big opportunities on offer for 21st century tourism. And what do I mean by 21st century tourism? It's creating a sustainable growth with everyone playing an actual role in the development of the tourism. It's looking at purpose and profit in equal measure, protecting people and place. It's involving regional spatial strategies, local development plans, efficiencies, and effective use of the resources that we have. The fundamental question when we're talking about all of these things, about housing, about depopulation, about tourism, is who actually has ownership of these things? Who's responsible? And we have a very special product here in Scotland. We have a product which is Scotland. When we talk about it being a tourist destination, we consider it to be obviously a geographical destination, but it's also a temporal one. It's also a state of mind and a time and place, as well as a geographical one. So we have some of the things that we have to do is to look at how things like tourism can actually enable us to address some of the issues that we have today with housing and so on. And to come back to housing for a moment, housing is actually, the right kind of housing is absolutely crucial for somewhere for people to live, but it's also crucial for addressing health issues and well-being and care, generally speaking, as well. So it's not just a roof over your head, it's much more than that. And we have to look at how we can create sustainable communities, how we can use the lived experience of communities past, present and future to create an identity going forward in 21st century tourism as well as everything else. We had the difficulties of COVID, but that's actually gives us a lot of opportunities in Scotland because the nature of tourism has changed. And I know Sandro will be saying more about that, so I shall not say too much. I'm conscious of time and the glare of Sarah. So, but what we can do is we can grab this opportunity. It's not always, things are not always bleak. There is always a plan B. There is always an opportunity to create something out of what appears to be a difficult situation. And tourism may well help us to do that and to resolve some of our other issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna, and for sticking perfectly to your 5 minutes of setting out your stall. I'm now going to ask Sandro to do the same, please. Over to you, Sandro.
So thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Donna, Frank. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting. I've been engaging with the Royal Society of Scotland of Edinburgh for about 7 years, also as a member of the Young Academy of Scotland. So it's great to be with you all again. And it's great to know that it's World Happiness Day. And in 4 weeks' time is World Leisure Day. So there's nothing better than leisure and happiness when we're talking about tourism, because obviously tourism brings happiness, right? And we all think about that. But the reality is that's not always the case. So we know that some conflicts between rural communities and tourism and tourists are neither new or exclusive to Scotland. And tourism research has highlighted issues of displacement and gentrification in rural areas across China, Sweden, Spain, Italy. But also, yeah, in Scotland, there's a growing evidence of points of increasing tension between hosts and guests. And the long-standing struggle of residents in places like the Isle of Skye to regulate issues with motorhomes and tourist numbers are probably like more than 10 years old. So there is an article in 2017 on The Guardian that already flagged concerns over affordable housing and other conflicts between visitors and locals in the Isle of Skye. At that time, The Guardian reported about 360 Airbnb lettings in the region. And if we check nowadays, that number seems to have risen significantly. So while the influx of visitors provides some economic benefits, it also exacerbates issues such as housing costs and can displace local families and forces the closure of businesses catering to those residents. So tourism research indicates that communities overwhelmed by visitor numbers often struggle to retain businesses and services essential to the local life. This can include hairdressers, pet shops, nurseries, optometries, dentists. And in this context, it's crucial to recognize 3 primary forms of displacement that tourism can cause in rural areas. So we can talk about direct displacement, exclusionary displacement, and pressure displacement. So the direct displacement occurs when rising costs and economic influence of external property developers or visitors end up forcing residents out of their communities. We can talk about exclusionary displacement that prevents specific demographic groups such as children or of local families from affording homes in their own neighborhoods due to gentrification processes, or pressure displacement that results from changes in local services and community dynamics that make difficult for long-term residents to stay. And in 2021, a report published by the John Muir Trust in Scotland highlighted several impacts of increasing visitor numbers on rural communities and natural spaces. And they include things that were obvious through the media that we all know, such as increased waste and littering, but also inappropriate roadside parking, irresponsible wild camping, inadequate sanitation facilities, increased traffic and pressure on local roads, lack of awareness of the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, growing number of camper vans and associated pressures, and among all these issues that the report presents is also the shortage of affordable housing due to the rise in short-term rentals. So this transformation contributes to process of tourism gentrification, where visitors can act both as consumers of the rural landscape and forces reshaping into the tourist-centric environment. In 2023, the Highlands hosted near 2.3 million overnight visitors from international and domestic tourists, with a local population just of around 238,000. So given the mounting pressures that the work of organizations such as the Scottish Community Tourism, the SCOTO, becomes crucial. So SCOTO shifts the focus from visitors to the well-being of the local community. And their vision is for every community in Scotland to be able to secure added value from tourism. Emphasizes that most important stakeholders are local residents, even as the needs of tourists are acknowledged. According to SCOTO, these communities must play a direct role in shaping and managing tourism offering to ensure economic, social, and environmental benefits and benefits remain within the area. So there's a lot of debates now. I think Donna mentioned the report on rural Scotland and the role that tourism can play in bringing back former residents or new residents. There are other policy aspects that are important, including the debates about visitor levy that I can see will be implemented in most councils in the next years, but also a new licensing regime for short-term lets. Now, what type of impact though this will have, if it's positive or detrimental, we'll see depending on the unique characteristics of each community, the type of tourism they experience, and the profile of visitors they attract. But again, a community-centered approach should be the path forward for Scotland rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandro. And I think you'll appreciate the challenge that we set our colleagues here in sticking to 5 minutes. So we do appreciate that from both of you. Thank you. And the questions have started coming in. We have our Q&A session now until 10 to 1. So do please pop your questions through to us. So the first question is from Jane. Does the rise in remote working present a positive opportunity for population retention in rural Scotland? Is it a potential solution, or does it create new challenges? Who would like to jump in first on that one?
Well, perhaps I could jump in on that one. Thank you for the question. It's a very good question, and it's very interesting because in the face of it, obviously, remote working means that people can stay in their own homes, in their own areas, particularly in island archipelagos, and work from there and maintain that population in that island. It is a really interesting question, and it's one that actually the work I've been doing in Vanuatu in tourism, we've created packages so that people can create their own business on their own islands and stay there, which has changed how they work there as well. But the rise in remote working means that people can make different lifestyle choices. They can, because we see the drain, even here in Orkney, we see the drain coming in from the islands into the main urban areas. I mean, everybody wants a bowling alley and several supermarkets and things like that nowadays. So that's what they do. But what we've noticed is that lots of people have chosen, people who are from here have chosen to do this kind of working, and people have come here with a view to having that kind of lifestyle and yet being able to work from home. It has made a huge difference in the retention of people. It's made a huge difference in the quality of the jobs that are available, because we have plenty of jobs in the Highlands and Islands, but underemployment is an issue in the nature of the kind of jobs that we have on offer and the kind of way that people make up piecemeal portfolios of various jobs so that they can stay in particular areas. Mm-hmm. So somebody on an island might be the fireman, they might be the person that works at the airport 2 hours a day, they might be the postie, all of these things. This changes the nature of the working environment. Now, I think it is a solution. I think it absolutely is. I think the world has completely changed with after COVID and all that sort of thing, and how we work and how we articulate. Speaking as somebody who was traditionally the only person on VC in a meeting, now it's everybody's in a meeting and it's hello and there's my cat. So it's completely changed. But what it has changed is the workplace dynamics, which is interesting. We don't now have people doing that same kind of commute with the bag of sandwiches and all of that sort of thing, going into an office, having that kind of working environment around the water cooler, talking about things and so on, completely changed that. So people have had to take a much more self-conscious attitude to maintaining a working environment and the staff engagement, things like that. So basically, at the end of the day, it's a rather long-winded answer to your question, Jane, but it's basically, it's a really good thing on a practical level, but there are implications for well-being.
Thank
Sarah,
you so much, Donna.
if you
Yes,
allow me
Sandro.
to just complement that, I think it's not only, the remote work is not only important for retention, but also for attraction. So what we see is a growth in number of digital nomads. So a lot of these digital nomads are looking to some islands and rural places where they can have a different type of lifestyle, different type of pace of life. And then so the increase in digital nomads, and there's a growing evidence in research about digital nomads also aligned to this and aligned to that report that we discussed from Scottish government about how we bring these new families, how we bring these new people to areas that like rural areas and islands. So I think that's an important point as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those dynamics and flows are really important to take account of. Thank you. We have a question now that looks at, I suppose, the different options, challenges that rural areas face to provide many services, if you like. Fiona Newton is asking, it seems that some of those in power believe that tourism and so-called green energy, wind turbines, pylons, BESS, etc., can all be successful together. What do the panel and the speakers think of this?
Oh, well, perhaps I can jump in again, but feel free, Sandro, to jump in. But yes, it's an interesting question because we look at the nature of tourism. I mean, the kind of tourism that we have in Scotland, Scotland is a quality product through and through, right? It's we have a high quality tourism. We have a high quality of tourist. Generally, we have a tourists who tend to go for repeat visits. They're looking for a particular type of, we do very well with niche tourism, for example. You know, people coming here for perhaps genealogy or perhaps the wildlife or sports and so on and so forth. And actually, we're seeing quite a rise in energy tourism. People being interested in coming to see how these things work because they're interesting. And, you know, personally, I find wind turbines strangely beautiful in a kind of abstract thing. If anybody's gone past the Cosy Meyer turbines in Caithness, you know, I mean, it looks like an artistic installation. But I think they don't have to be mutually exclusive because we're telling the story of a landscape. We're telling the story of a people, and we're not set in aspic either. We change and we evolve. Our landscape has changed and evolved, which often surprises people. They think it was like this 5,000 years ago. It wasn't. We were a lot warmer. So it seems to me that they can be very successful together. But Sandro, you're maybe wanting to come in.
No, I fully agree with you. I think like what we see is like wind farms finding new ways to create attractions to visitors and create experiences to visitors, but also engaging with the community. There's always debates about how beautiful or not beautiful, but depending where you come from, that is an attraction. I'm from Brazil, and the place where I'm from, we don't see many wind turbines. So when my family comes here, actually they actually like to see as well. So yeah.
Thank you. We have 3 questions that I think are about sensitivity to place and sensitivity to communities. So I'll take them separately, but we're now entering that theme, if you like, for the next few minutes. So firstly, Anna de Jong, are the mechanisms in place to genuinely approach tourism from a community perspective? And what, if anything, might need to change to enhance this?
So that's a good question from Anna, and I think that is, as I mentioned Scotto, and I think there is a lot of countries now that have these community organizations that are the center of the decision making of tourism agendas, and I think there is a shift in terms of allowing communities to make a decision, and together with that, there is an evolving debate in tourism research that is about the concept of care. So we've seen a lot of the idea of carrying capacity, the capacity that the environment can cope with the interaction of humans. But now we have a lot of debates about the concept of carrying capacity, of how much can we develop the concept of care in both visitors and hosts in order to take care of that environment that is dealing with that sector. So for me, it's about how policymakers can encourage, fund, support or community organizations such as Scotto.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, the questions move up and down. Those of you who work on Zoom, you'll know that. So the second question around community is from Jessica Wood. My concern here is that there might be an over-reliance in tourism. Global economic shifts can have implications on this industry. What can local communities do to make their economies more plural and more diverse? Sandro, I don't know if you want to continue in this discussion, this theme.
I think that's a fair point, and I think COVID showed that over-reliance in one economy as a problematic element for many islands and many rural communities. I think there is a process and again, it is connected to both policy and how policy can encourage different sectors of economy, but also understanding that tourism can be and is a source of economic benefits and social development. But it is about how you diversify the economy. Again, I think that is something else that should be planned by the hosts, by the community itself.
Mm-hmm. And we'll come back to a related question in a couple of minutes. Donna, do you want to add to that? Or?
Yes, I would have to say that actually sustainable communities are usually quite resilient. We did a large piece of work called Communities, Changescapes of Recoveries, Communities in the Highlands and Islands, looking at how people felt they had coped with the lack of tourism activity during COVID. And we did case studies, one in Orkney, one in Easter Ross, one in Caithness, and one in Inverness, to look at what people had done, particularly in areas that relied completely, very, very much on tourism, such as Orkney. And what we discovered in the first wave of lockdown, 47 new businesses were created, which were doing different things. A lot of them were to do with food and drink, admittedly, because we were all doing a lot of that during COVID. But it was the understanding that you can't always have your eggs in one basket. People had done all these things with tourism because it was a ready market, but they were quite ready to adapt and change and see what would work to support their communities. So that was a general inference that we were able to draw from all of the different case studies in different ways. So people are aware that they may be putting all their eggs in the one basket, but these are communities that did things before tourism. Mm-hmm. And they've the opportunity to do other things as well. So I do take the point, but I think there's always the understanding that people are resilient.
Thank you. The next question is about resilience in different communities, if you like, not just the ones that are tourist hotspots. So Jalea Khalilzadeh asks, in an established destination, I can see how tourism might contribute to population retention. But what about an underdeveloped, unknown destination with lots of social and economic issues?
I think that's the debate that is about the steps of development of tourism, and I think that may go in different phases. So if it's an underdeveloped tourism destination with potential, what we need to really be careful is how those initial tourism steps are put in place. There is the potential to then grow. I come from a country that is seen as underdeveloped in Brazil. In many parts, it's underdeveloped for tourism. And what we've seen is about what are the first steps in that process of tourism growth and how they are taking place. If they are sold to multinational corporations and the impact that has, or if that is the empowered local community that takes ownership of the development of that tourism industry. So depending on the country you come, different policies may impact in different ways. But I think there is a huge concern in the tourism research area about almost selling tourist landscapes to multinational corporations that not always look to the benefits of the local communities, as not always protecting the natural resources.
Donna, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that covers it.
Great, thank you. Looking again at local economies, there's a question here from Sandy Brunton. Is tourism actually pricing itself out of the ordinary person's market, with many B&Bs stopping due to costs and red tape, and a small cabin for two costing £1,000 for a week in high season?
I think that's a big risk in some areas, even more where tourism flows want to be under control. So there is a high risk of us to make tourism an elite activity. So there is concern about that. I think there's a lot of tourism research now being done about that. So yeah, so that's something that, again, regulations should be entering place to make sure that it is accessible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have 3 questions now that relate in a way to second homes and affordable housing, and I suppose the impact of tourism and popularity. Megan McInnes of Applecross Community Company says that in Applecross, 50% of the housing stock are short-term lets or second homes. If the new licensing and control area regulations don't have the expected impacts, what else might work? And a related question, if I may just jump, is Sandy Thompson asked, could you talk about the impact and patterns of class shift through the process of gentrification? Is it simply economical, or are the changes deeper than that for communities? And Martin Allen talks about affordable housing and retaining local people in communities where there's a concentration of tourism. So what about these questions to do with housing stock and also processes of gentrification that come from tourism? Who would like to start?
Perhaps I can jump in on the housing stock.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a very interesting question there. And one of the things that we can do is look again. I mean, obviously each area has got a local housing strategy, but we can look again at the deployment of council's housing stock, because council houses were originally built for families. And what we find today is that we're moving towards a much higher level of 1-person or 2-person households. So what's needed to be required to be built by the local authorities is not necessarily family homes. It's homes for 1 or 2 people, so they can release the council stock for families. And that would be one thing that we could do. Other things we can do is have a greater legislator over second homes and Airbnb, which is astonishingly prevalent in our society. Absolutely astonishing, and regulate that more clearly. But we have to use what resources we have to best advantage and look again at what the actual market is and what the trends are in terms of households, and apply that to any new builds.
Yeah, I'm quite cynical about some of the direct impacts of some of these new licensing, and as a mechanism to control. I think, and this is similar to visitor levy, people who think that visitor levy will help to control what they call over tourism. I think that's quite superficial. I think the idea of both the licensing fees and the new licensing, both the visitor levy, won't have that direct impact on housing stock or in the numbers of tourism as some mainstream media try to portray.
So we have a couple of questions around the visitor levy, actually. Ben Mackin says, I'm worried about the visitor levy. Highland Council expect 10% of accommodation businesses to close. What do the panel think of the impact of these closures might have on the region? And we have other questions coming in about the visitor levy, including from Janet Gillis. Do the panel think that a visitor levy is fair to local residents? And will it actually help or cause more problems than it's worth?
I think there is a couple of, again, sometimes the debate that we see in the public forum is quite superficial. I don't think the visitor levy will be developed and implemented in the same way across the councils. I think, but as I said, I think there is a significant impact on local businesses, small operators, in terms of the operation of those visitor levies. And I don't think there is a benefit, or there is no evidence in the literature about a benefit of visitor levy in reducing overcrowded areas. So that's for places like Edinburgh, right? So I think we are still on a very starting point. A lot of people think in our area, and we are seeing the potential implementation of these visitor levies very soon, but I think we are still very early stages on understanding what will be the consequences of these visitor levies, and I'm not always optimist either.
Mm-hmm. Donna.
Yeah, I mean, visitor levies are not new. This is not a new thing that's been created for Scotland. This is a perfectly viable proposition to at least lever more finance. And I take Sandro's point that it's not going to do anything about overcrowding, no, but lever more finance here. For example, just to take Orkney again as an example, we're the premier cruise ship destination in the UK, and yet very little actual money comes into the Orkney economy from this, apart from the harbours fees and things like that. And so this is actually a very interesting sector leading initiative to have a levy on the cruise ships in that way, which I think is perfectly fair, because the use of resources and all of these things, and somebody has also raised a question about people not being keen on tourism. Well, there's quite a lot of people in Orkney not keen on tourism. And that's the reason for that, is the vast amount of people who come off the cruise ships, and the fact that our streets are closed and all sorts of things there. So why should we not receive some sort of emolument for that? And I don't think it'll put people off. I mean, I've paid visitor levies in various places, and £3 a night or £5 a night or something added onto your hotel bill or what have you isn't really going to make a huge difference to people's holidays.
Yeah, I don't think that's impact. I agree with Donna. I don't think the major impact is on the visitor. I think some of the impact is on the processes that small bed and breakfasts will have in terms of time of processing the fees and things like that. So I think this needs to be thought about. There's absolutely no evidence in the literature that visitor levy reduces the number of tourists.
Okay, and we're moving into an area of regulation and legislation and so on in this discussion. So there's a couple around that. Adrienne Carmichael says, what role can legislation play in managing the interactions between tourism, housing need and rural depopulation? Are the current and proposed laws having the desired impact in the Highlands? And also a sub-point of that, H. Paul has said, are we being clear on the difference between a second home and an Airbnb? They are different entities and make different contributions to communities. So we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. What thoughts do either or both of you have on the role of legislation managing these different drivers, and also the particularities of different offerings in the tourist space?
Well, it goes back to my point I made at the beginning about who is responsible and who has ownership. The legislation should be for the benefit of the communities and for the resources themselves. That's the priority, is the community sustainability and the sustainability of the resources. So they absolutely have to do that, and they have to look at what we can do to make sure that particularly with the housing need, there's actually somewhere for people to stay. So that these things are all very closely tied together, absolutely. But it's what the priorities are, and who has the ownership, and who fundamentally has the responsibility, which is not the same as ownership necessarily, the responsibility for making these decisions and developing these tourism destinations in the way that they are.
Anything to add, Sandro?
No, I think that's it. I think the idea of responsibility and ownership are important. And again, as part of what I said before, is how we strengthen the local communities, local community groups, in order to actively contribute to those debates and the decision-making process.
Thank you. And I suppose what this brings in is the time dimension, which you referred to in your opening remarks, Donna. Martin Allen is saying, do you not think the danger is Scotland in the community, the rural and island communities, are making decisions for short-term gain rather than sustainability? And also adds that it appears some communities are being bought off. And that relates back to another point that you referred to, Donna, about diametrically opposed views within communities, and some of those want tourism, some of them don't. Some of that will be about making a quick buck now compared with the sustainability of place. So let's look at that theme for a minute.
Well, that's for you. A lot of new tourism strategies are built on SDGs, for example. So people are realizing, it's the kind of tourism we have in Scotland isn't sort of bums on seats on a plane somewhere and people lying on the beach drinking vast jugs of inexpensive but toxic substances. It's about a quality of a product, and people are aware that this is a quality product, and they need to preserve it. And they can't just go on. If you look at the case of Bali, for example, which is completely, the tourism product completely supersedes every aspect of everyday life, including tourists tramping through the temples and all sorts of things like that. That's something that I think the Scottish local authorities in particular have grasped with, and they've understood that we need to preserve things, that we need to have plans to make sure that these resources are still there. They've been around a long time. but they need to be preserved, and we need to see how we can reinterpret what the tourism product is in order to take away some of the problems and the issues. I mean, here we have people getting on buses, and we have like 10 buses at Scarabray going around. You know, it's like an anthill. Basically, it's like an anthill with people on it. So we have to look again at what our tourism product is and how we can reinvent it, re-establish it, recreate it, and make it into something that is sustainable and is also making sure that we preserve what's actually there. And I think that people have a very, if you give them ownership of their cultural identity, if you give them ownership of their cultural heritage, of their environment, then they're in the narrative, they're in the story, they're being carried along, they're interested. It's not just a question of getting as many tourists as possible in there for a fry up in the morning. It's how this is going to go forward. So I think the ownership issue and giving people the understanding that they do have that ownership, that they can say that this is how they want to present themselves. And the fact that tourism has changed so much in the sense that people are now looking for bragging rights and experiences, brings back the point made about the less developed areas, that those are now a more attractive option perhaps than they were, because that's a bragging right, that's an experience as well. So we're looking at different kinds of tourism experience.
Thank you. Sandro?
I think an important thing for me is it goes back to the idea of community, right? So if you want to think about the sustainability of tourism, and you think about and talking about environmental sustainability of areas, rural areas, and assets, if you want to use that word, I think it's about sometimes there is a whole level of education that it needs to be done in communities about the idea of, is this a short game, or is that we need to look at, and why? Because some people would always look first through their personal interests. So, hospitality and hotels and bed and breakfast will look first to their personal interests. Owners of attractions may look to their different interests. And I think that is, in terms of strengthening communities, to actually have that idea of tourism education, where they will look through different perspectives and collectively understand that a different approach may benefit everyone instead of only personal interests. So I'll go back to the idea of strengthening communities.
And what about virtual tourism and the ability to visit somewhere without actually being there through virtual reality? I know that this is something that Orkney undertakes already in relation to Scarabray, for example. What potential is there for virtual tourism to try and address this balance between economic activity, thriving communities, and tourism, as Brian also comments in the questions?
Well, I think it gives the potential to have a much richer experience. Some of the sites that we have across the Highlands and Islands are not that accessible. It takes time to get to them. If we're looking at people having a short space of time, it also gives people the chance to, as it were, visit places before they come. So they get a sense of the place before they come. And I think, there's been a lot of work done at UHI Northwest and Hebrides on virtual reality there over in there too. And I think it's a very exciting way of presenting things to people that otherwise would not have a chance to get there. And it's also a way of moving the focus away from the standard product into things and new areas, to things that are ready to be looked at in a different way. So I think it is a really interesting way of making sure that we can interpret even more of the landscape and more of human occupation, human geography, and articulation with that landscape and the products of that articulation. And I think that it's a very enjoyable thing as well. It really enables the person having the experience to have the kind of experience that they want. They're not being chivied along by a tour guide. If I had £1 for every tour guide that's come out with some howler, right? I remember being on a tour once, not in Scotland, and my son was with me, and he took one look at my face and said, "Please don't make a fuss, mother." Right. So I didn't, because I was just a tourist, but it gives the chance to make sure the information is accurate, to make sure that the experience is as total as possible. So I think it's an enrichment of the experience.
Again, I think that's fascinating about virtual tourism. And my question is, there's no doubt that there is a huge educational potential of virtual tourism and educating, and also reducing some of the environmental impacts, in terms of the number of people visiting a very fragile environment. My question is always also economically, who is winning behind the use of virtual reality? Is that money not staying in the community because these companies who developed virtual reality tours are based somewhere else? right? And how much the local economy gains with that, because yeah, is it important, but what about all the other secondary economic benefits that there is when you visit a site? So you need to actually, again, is a very broad statement when you're thinking about virtual reality and tourism, but it needs to be taught and adapted and adjusted for different communities, thinking about who is actually gaining from that.
That's a really interesting point that leads us on to the next one, around who is gaining and so on. We've got a question around whether home working actually is detrimental to housing stock availability, as opposed to being wholly positive in retaining population, with people moving out from cities to rural areas. That's one example of views for and against, if you like. One question from KG here is, discussions around tourism in rural Scotland always seem so adversarial, and this can put people off engaging to improve things for all. So how do we remedy this? We have these multifaceted views, some contrasting, some definitely antagonistic to each other. How do you, both Sandro and Donna, engage in debates that are less adversarial, and what can we do more broadly to take away that flavour of the debates?
Well, perhaps I could jump in here. I think the important thing is that people's voices are heard, that you don't turn up with a fait accompli. You sit there, you listen, you take account of what they're saying, you allow them to state their case, you allow everybody else to state their case, and you evaluate the findings there and what they have said and how that can feed into any consultation, things that are happening there. But people do have to have their voices heard. I mean, somebody who's moved here from somewhere else and is totally against wind farms or something like that, that is their point of view, right? People who have lived here for a long time and are wanting to diverse their farm into some areas of croftland and things like that, their view needs to be heard as well. And what it is understanding that we're all part of the same community, and ultimately we all want the very best for that community. And people have to realise that that's what we're working towards. I mean, Scotland has a very strong Scandinavian ethos when it comes to community life and the power of the community. We just need to look at our taxes and what we spend our money on to see that. So it's a question of taking forward what's best for the community. And that may not always be what everybody agrees with, but if everybody can agree that that's what they're working to. And
but even within a community, there isn't necessarily unanimity on what's best for the community, is there?
So no, not at all. But as long as everybody has their voices heard and there's a decision made at some point.
Okay.
That's the point.
I think the interesting thing about that is we're advocating for a cohesive community in decision making for tourism, when actually we need to remember that in many ways tourism may be eroding community cohesion. So the paradox of that is, and that's by, when you see too many Airbnbs, that erodes community cohesion, right? So it's the paradox of wanting community to make decisions in one side, while on the other side, tourism can potentially act as damaging community cohesion. So it is the paradox that, and again, sometimes through legislation and you can mend some of these issues.
And if we come back to the theme alongside legislation of ownership and responsibility, those themes come through, don't they, as who actually is managing not just the present but the future. And looking to the future, a question from Ben Makin here is, assuming 10% of accommodations do close due to the visitor levy as predicted by Highland Council as one rural example, what impact will the reduced beds have on visitor numbers, tourist attractions, pubs and restaurants? So in other words, this current state can't last.
Yeah, and I think that's a big concern, clearly, right? And I think it's a very fair point, because actually overnight stays in accommodations such as bed and breakfasts usually increase the expenditures of visitors compared to motorhomes or camper vans. So the biggest, which causes other types of environmental problems as well. So actually, I thinking about Ben's point is not only about the reduction of tourists, but is the replacement of certain types of tourists with other types of tourism that is more environmentally damaging and less economically will economically benefit less the community. So it is something that it is concerning.
Donna, do you have anything to add to that, those trends, and looking forward as well? What do we do if?
Yes, I'm not so sure that this will actually come to pass, I would have to say. Because we do have an awful lot of footfall, and we have an awful lot of people returning and staying for more than one day, and all sorts of things like that. But I think looking towards that, we would maybe need to look at how the people with these businesses that have closed can contribute to other businesses, how we can look at creating a career in tourism. I mean, at the moment, what we have in the Highlands Downs, as I referred to earlier, people doing various different jobs. When it comes to tourism, that is a seasonal activity, right? Whereas in other countries like France or Spain, if you're a waiter in France, then you're going to have your own place someday, Chez Robert, or you're going to be a sommelier or something. You've got a plan. It's a career. Here, it's not seen in the same way. So we need to change attitudes as to what is a viable way to use tourism to create an actual viable career for somebody, a full-time career, and not just B&B in the summertime, which could be affected by this. Although personally, I don't think it will.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that is something about legislation. Again, going back to legislation, how you support local businesses, small rural businesses, in order to make sure that they retain staff, right, as well, because that's the other thing that we haven't talked about. There is a lot of challenges, and I know a lot of people working in the south of Scotland in challenges in finding chefs, retaining chefs, and that has a huge impact on the offering of tourism itself. So again, how in a wider framework of governance, how do we think the support that is given to local businesses is an important thing?
Absolutely. How do we get people to see that this is a viable career structure for them, that they can commit to, that they've got the support for, that they can move forward with qualifications, not just at FE level, but at HE level and further, how they can then themselves have ownership and be part of the decision-making process.
So your questions, thank you, have prompted a lot of discussion around kind of macro level issues through to the micro. And rather than me summing up, we now hand over to Frank to try and give us his perspectives in the next 5 minutes, the threads that he has seen coming through from the fantastic responses we've had from Sandro and Donna. So Frank, now over to you.
Gosh, yes, thanks, Sarah. That was really fascinating. I don't think I've taken so many notes in 40 minutes for many, many years. Let me try and, a lot of these things are interlinked, so forgive me for squashing things together and trying to make some segue between them to make sense in a short summary. Clearly the issues are complex and they're not new, but they are constantly changing. Several points made, not one size does not fit all. In one sense, people are seeing no change and these things not being addressed and becoming, more attenuated perhaps in some cases, and numerous new tensions arising. Paradoxes made on several occasions between pros and cons, and the fact that changing forms of tourism is something that looks like becoming quite important. Secondly, these one size fits all and the change, the complex integration means that it has impacts on not just the economy, but on housing, on heritage, on perceptions of place. And it's how to address these in a positive manner that is the challenge in terms of a package for the community. The balance of opinion within a community, because not everybody will be happy. Those of us who live in rural areas know that that's not the case. Much more so, I think, than urban areas where people don't normally get together in one street to discuss these issues. In rural areas, that is much more interconnected and much more knowing your neighbours and having wider discussion on that. So that has links, for example, into housing stock, into the pricing out of particular activities. It pushes towards elitism or else mass dumping of people with little benefit to the community. Third, there was an interesting discussion that came up in several places, it resurfaced, on displacement. And Sandro was talking about direct, exclusionary and pressure displacement, which together mean that we're looking at changes in the nature of work, both remote working, working practices, attitudes toward work, the whole dynamics of that within a rural area, which means that it's not necessarily the same format that you might expect to find in a larger urban conurbation, where you can, if you lose your job one day, you can go around the corner and get a job at some other, place the next. It's a much more dynamic, much more fluid situation, which has knock-on links to local services, which remain there after the community loses their visitors in the seasonal flux of things. So it's about access to everything from swimming pools to football pitches to shops and so on and so forth. Fourthly, increasing visitors' pressure is becoming an issue. Many feel it's out with local control. Again, popped up in several occasions. Who is responsible? How to manage the different phases of tourism, whether it's embryo tourism in less frequented areas or mass areas of honeypot activity. Interesting discussion that's beginning to get started about virtual tourism and the link between that. How, dare I say, to monetize that, to actually bring it to the benefit of community rather than just to have a webcam watching your movements every day as you walk around the village. There's a whole issue in terms of that one. There's a real, the fifth point was a very healthy attitude being developed about a shift to well-being of the local community rather than actually what they can provide. So the well-being of the community as a whole, how does that add value? How does that increase the plurality of the offer? Do they have a direct role in management? It goes back to a very Keynesian or even a very Marxist view of who benefits from all this in terms of the end day. Really good point that was made central to the story, but we're telling the story of a landscape and a people, and the people should be included within that narrative. Really key point, and that actually links to perhaps to our session in 2 weeks' time on in this series from the FRSE. I think the issues raised about what's next, how to avoid being superficial in our responses to these things, so that change actually does mean change rather than just tweaking the knobs and business as usual. Discussions on visitor levy, Airbnb freeze, perhaps burdens on housing stock so that it can't just be sold off willy-nilly. Raising council tax, for example, and we've seen that some holiday homes are now being sold, but because they've been done up in the interim, they are at a standard that are beyond the price level that are affordable by local communities. So even if these holiday homes are removed from the housing the tourist market, they still are unaffordable locally. The need for
I need to draw you to a close very soon.
Yeah.
Thanks.
2 points: visitor management plans with real control and real issues, and the whole issue about dynamics of work and lifestyle change and how does that impact upon the reality of the situation. I think that was it. Sorry
to interrupt you at the end there, Frank. Apologise. Thank you for those reflections, and it's a tough gig to do that bit, to be the summariser. So thank you for bringing out those threads, and there's certainly even more food for thought as we continue to take the discussions forward. Our two speakers haven't quite finished yet. They know that they're going to be asked for one single takeaway message, and you have maximum 1 minute each to say what that is. So who wants to go first, Sandro or Donna?
I'll go first. I would just like to say that the solution to our problems is in our own hands. The future of our communities is in our own hands. So we should seize it and make it in the shape that we want it to be and not leave it to other people.
Thanks. That echoes Frank's closing remarks as well. So thank you for that. Sandro, what's your single takeaway point?
That we need to keep strengthening communities, make them cohesive, and allowing them to voice their views and participate in the decision-making process related to tourism in their areas.
Thank you. So the centrality of communities would seem to be the takeaway theme from Donna, Sandro, and Frank. So with that, I would like to thank our speakers and you, the audience. And I'd like to highlight that this and other sessions will be available on FRSE's YouTube channel. And do go in and like those videos and share them with your pals, particularly if you have connections in rural areas and want to share these around and generate more discussion and comments, which we'd love to hear. So my thanks to you all. to you, the audience, and have a brilliant day. Thanks from the RSE. Goodbye.